A street corner, 10:15 at night. Cold enough to see our breath. She is standing in front of me, phone pressed to her ear, ending a 15-year arrangement in real time, right here on this pavement, because I asked. Her mother's voice carries faintly through the speaker. Saren's eyes stay on mine, not wavering, not flinching, not asking permission to keep going. I expected deflection, the careful answer, the composure she builds like architecture around every difficult thing she has ever decided to carry. Instead, she is taking apart the only reason we were ever supposed to meet in the dark, while the city moves around us like it has no idea what's happening here. It doesn't. But I do. If you want to hear uncensored, too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description, tell us where you are watching from, and subscribe. The morning my mother informed me I'd been engaged to a woman since I was 12 years old, I was eating toast. Not even particularly good toast. The bread had been sitting in the freezer for a week, defrosted impatiently, so it came out with that slightly cardboard quality of something that had crossed from cold to room temperature and never quite recovered. I was eating it anyway, with butter that had gone slightly salty from sitting too long in the dish, and reading something forgettable on my phone. The kind of morning that has no texture, the kind that disappears entirely by afternoon, with nothing left to identify it by. My mother sat across the table and explained it very calmly, the promise, the two families, the agreement made before I understood what agreements meant. She folded her hands on the table first. This was not unusual. My mother had a way of composing herself before difficult conversations that looked exactly like someone preparing to fold a very large amount of origami, everything arranged, nothing hasty. I put my phone face down out of habit, which was the right instinct, though I didn't know yet why. I had no memory of saying yes. I had no memory of being asked. What I had was the image of being 12, and terrified of most things. Homework, gym class, the particular social arithmetic of cafeteria seating, the growing understanding that I was becoming a kind of person who was going to require some explaining, while somewhere above my head, adults had been quietly deciding the entire shape of my future. I might have survived the information. It was, if I thought about it the right way, a thing that happened in other people's families, in other people's centuries, and I was in my late 20s, and nothing had actually happened, and my mother was explaining, now, with the coffee still warm, and there was still time to articulate that this was not how I understood my life to work. I might have handled it. Then she finally said the name, and that name was the exact part I was simply not prepared for. If you want to hear uncensored, too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description. Tell us where you are watching from, and subscribe. I should back up. My mother is not a dramatic person. She is the kind of woman who folds napkins into perfect triangles before dinner, even when no one is coming over, who serves coffee before problems because she believes coffee creates a small ritual buffer between people and whatever they are about to have to say to each other, and who has held the conviction for as long as I can remember that most difficult things become manageable if you sit with them long enough over food. The sitting part matters to her. The food part matters. The sitting together, specifically, over something warm, which she has always seemed to understand as a form of ceremony. She had been sitting with this particular difficult thing for 15 years. I had come home for the weekend in November. It was a Sunday morning. A morning with that specific quality that Sunday mornings in November have a kind of retroactive permission to go slowly, to allow the week to be over, and the next one not quite begun. The light was doing its particular November thing through the kitchen window, watery and pale and not quite convinced of itself, coming through at a low angle that lit the counter and left the ceiling in a kind of permanent dusk. Outside, the leaves were past the decorative part of their dying and into the merely brown part. I was eating toast and reading something on my phone, thinking about nothing more complicated than whether I needed to leave by noon to beat traffic. My mother sat down across from me, folded her hands on the table, and told me she had something to explain. I put my phone down. The folded hands meant, what comes next is real, and you are going to have to receive it. She told me that when I was 12 years old, she and her closest friend had made an agreement. The kind of agreement, she said carefully, with the particular care of someone who has rehearsed a speech and found it different when the moment arrived. that families made when they were close, and believed that who their children became might be shaped by who their children knew. This was the first sentence. She said it, and then she let it sit in the kitchen for a moment before she continued. When I was 12, and her friend's daughter was 17, the two of them had decided their daughters were meant for each other. They had not meant it cruelly. They had not meant it with the specific rigidity of a legal contract. The word engaged was perhaps stronger than the intention, more of a hope, she said, a direction, a promise between mothers that they would steer us toward the possibility when the time was right. The right time, she explained, meant when I was adult enough to be told, when circumstances aligned, when a meeting could be arranged without it becoming a spectacle or an obligation. When she said right time, she meant now. She meant the dinner she had planned for the following Saturday. I told her I didn't understand. She told me more plainly. The same facts, arranged slightly differently, without the softening framework of her first attempt. I don't remember saying yes, I said. You were 12, she said. You weren't asked directly. I was not asked, I said again. I said it slowly, because the sentence deserved the space it was taking up. I was not asked. Someone made a decision about my future while I was 12 years old and did not think to check with me. You were considered, she said. There is a difference. There was a long pause in which I looked at my toast. It had gone cold. The butter had gone from melted to re-solidified in that way that makes it look unpleasant. I was aware that I was looking at toast in order not to look at my mother, while the information reorganized itself inside me into something I could actually hold. I said, I'm gay. I know, she said. That's why this arrangement makes sense. I looked at her for a very long moment. My mother looked back with the expression she wore when she was waiting for me to process something she had already processed. She has known me for 27 years. She has understood, for most of them, that I process things in stages, that the first reaction is rarely the real one, that the real one tends to arrive slightly behind, like a second wason that gathers itself before it arrives and is always bigger than you expected. She used the word in our language that translates most accurately as betrothed, which belongs to a century I have never lived in and landed in that kitchen like something dropped from a great height. It hit the table between us, and neither of us looked at it directly. She's 5 years older than me, I said. I didn't know I was going to say that. The fact had arrived fully formed, the calculation performed by some part of my brain that was already 3 steps ahead of the rest of me. I said it before I understood what the saying of it revealed, which told me something I wasn't ready to examine yet but which was already there, being examined by some quieter part of me without my permission. She's 32, my mother confirmed. She said it the way you say something you have been holding ready. Established. She has her own company. She has been patient. Patient, I said. Patient, she repeated, with a composure that suggested she did not understand why I was finding the word inadequate, as if patience were the correct response to an arrangement neither of us had consented to. As if it were a virtue she was presenting as a credential on someone else's behalf. I pushed my chair back. The legs made a sound against the kitchen floor too loud for the quiet of the morning, a small violence against the Sunday. I'm not coming to Saturday dinner. You'll want to, said my mother. She said it without smugness, without performance. She said it the way you say something when you believe it in a way that has nothing to do with wanting to be right. I told her I wouldn't. She looked at me with the expression she had been perfecting for 27 years, the one that said she understood my position and was also confident in her own, and that she was prepared to wait me out with the serenity of someone who had already seen how these things tend to go. My mother has a very long memory and a very long patience, and she has been proven right about me enough times that I find it aggravating in the way that only people who genuinely know you can be aggravating. It is the aggravation of being understood by someone when you are hoping to be misunderstood. Then she told me the woman's name. I sat back down. Here is the thing about that name. Here is what I have to explain, and why explaining it requires me to say things I had not said out loud to anyone, including myself. Saren Vale was not a stranger to me. She was the daughter of my mother's best friend, which meant she had moved through the edges of my childhood in the way that matters more in retrospect than it does at the time, a name mentioned with affection in my mother's phone calls, A face seen at family-adjacent events too infrequent to build anything solid. A figure who existed in my peripheral understanding of the world without ever quite resolving into a person I thought about directly. The periphery is its own kind of presence. I understand that now. At a family coast trip when I was 12, she had been 17, and in the car, and she had been the only adult-adjacent person who had answered my questions about high school with the honest version instead of the curated version that adults tend to offer children. I had not been asking for the curated version. She had seen that and responded accordingly. It was the kind of small transaction that should not mean anything, and had apparently, somewhere underneath my awareness, meant something that stayed. I had thought about her precisely 3 times in 15 years, which is to say, I had thought about her precisely 3 times that I was able to honestly account for, which is different from not thinking about her. The accounting and the actual are not always the same register. Once at 17, finding a photograph at the back of my mother's photo album, a Sunday afternoon group shot from a beach trip, the year after the coast trip, a year I had not been present for. She was at the edge of the frame, half-turned, the light at a particular angle on the line of her profile, and I had looked at it for longer than I looked at anything else in that album, and then very deliberately turned the page, and not thought about it again in any conscious sense, or so I had told myself. Once at 23, reading an article about her firm in an architectural design publication that someone had sent to a group chat, a piece about young firms doing unexpected things with urban public space. There was a photograph of her on the second page, professional, a posed portrait with the specific formality of someone who does not particularly enjoy sitting still for photographs. I had looked at it for long enough that the phone screen had dimmed. I had closed the tab. I had made myself a tea I did not want, and stood in my kitchen thinking about something else very deliberately for 10 minutes. And once 6 months ago, at my cousin's wedding, when I had seen her across a crowded entrance hall, and had recognized her immediately from the article, from the photograph, from some older register I couldn't name at the time, and had felt a specific sensation across my collarbone that I had chosen, in the moment, to translate as coincidence or recognition, or any number of things that were not what it actually was. I had stood where I was. I had not crossed the room. She had also been at the wedding. She had also not crossed the room. I didn't know that yet, but I would. My mother was watching me. "Tell me what she knows," I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. "Everything," said my mother. Her family discussed it openly. Saren grew up knowing that one day, when you were old enough, there would be a conversation. Did she agree to it? At 17? A pause. She didn't refuse it. "That is not the same as agreeing," I said. "Saturday dinner is how you find out," my mother said. I did not go to Saturday dinner. I went to her office. The decision did not arrive all at once. It accumulated through the weekend and into the week, the way some decisions do not arriving at a moment, but building in the margins of everything else. I drove home Sunday, with the windows cracked, which was something I did when I was trying to think too many things at once. I did not call Belen. I went to bed early, and lay in the dark, thinking about the coast trip and the photograph, and the tab I had closed and the entrance hall, and the specific calculation involved in knowing someone for 15 years and choosing, each time an occasion arose, not to make more of it. The management of a distance is its own form of attention. The decision came on a Tuesday, while I was editing a manuscript about a woman who spent 40 years waiting for something that never arrived. I was on page 12 when I put the pages down, looked at the far wall, and thought, I am not doing that. I looked up the firm. Saren Vale was the co-founder of a landscape architecture and urban design practice that had been running for 6 years. The firm's website had the restraint that costs money, clean lines, honest photography that showed places as they were used rather than staged, project descriptions in plain language. Her professional photograph was at the bottom of the team page, smaller than I expected, in a row of faces that all looked like people who had been asked to sit still and were doing their best. Short, dark hair, high cheekbones, the expression of someone who didn't need to perform competence because it was simply visible in the baseline of her face, in the way she was sitting. I wrote down the address. The physical act of writing it on paper was deliberate. I was making it a thing that existed outside a screen, a thing that could not be closed. The firm occupied a converted industrial building 4 blocks from the river, retained original bones, brick and steel and high windows, the whole thing feeling considered rather than contrived. The lobby smelled faintly of cedar and something green, the deliberate choice of someone who thought about what entering a space did to the person entering it. I told the receptionist I didn't have an appointment, but was there to speak to Saren Vale and that it was personal. I gave my name. I waited. She came out of a door at the back of the lobby perhaps 10 minutes later, which meant she had taken the time to decide to come out rather than send a message back asking who I was. She already knew who I was. The coming was a choice. She was taller than I remembered from the photographs. Dark trousers, white shirt with the sleeves rolled to mid-forearm in the way of someone who has been working for several hours and made adjustments accordingly. A pencil tucked behind one ear that she appeared to have forgotten about, coffee in one hand. She moved with a particular economy, the way people move when they have very clear ideas about where they are going and have stopped managing anyone else's perception of that movement. When she saw me, she went very still for exactly 3 seconds. Not surprised still. The stillness of someone who had known something was coming and had arrived at its actual arrival and needed a moment for the theoretical and the actual to recognize each other. Then she said, "Cleo." Not a question. My name, precisely, the way you say the name of something you already knew was approaching and have been waiting for without knowing you were waiting. I said, "We need to talk." She said, "I know." Her expression was not quite anything nameable. Not wary, not relieved, not carefully neutral the way people are neutral when they are performing it. Something in the space between attention and anticipation that looked like a person who had made the deliberate choice to be fully present for whatever was about to happen. She took me to a small conference room with a glass wall overlooking a courtyard garden. The firm had clearly designed themselves grasses in copper and bronze that moved in the cold wind, plantings that looked both intentional and alive, a pathway that curved rather than cut. She sat on the side facing the window, which left me the side facing the room. There was a pitcher of water and 2 glasses. She had asked someone to bring those while she was deciding whether to come out. I had planned something to say. I had written it in the notes app on my phone on the train over. I had intended to tell her that I was not and had never been a party to any arrangement, that my life was not a promise someone else got to honor on my behalf, that whatever our mothers had agreed to had no claim on what I chose to do with my own present tense. I had intended to say it clearly and without the meanness of someone who is scared, which was what I actually was. Instead, I said, "How long have you known?" She looked at me. She had the quality, I noticed it then, and would keep noticing it, of looking at you rather than at the space near you, making no adjustment for social comfort, offering no performance of attention. "My mother told me when I was 19, she said. She told me there was a promise between families, that when you were old enough, we would be introduced properly and the rest would be ours to decide." 13 years, I said. "Yes. And you never came to find me." "I didn't think that was mine to do," she said. She said it with a calm that was not indifference. I could see the difference. It was the calm of someone who had thought about this enough that the reasoning was settled rather than constructed on the spot. "The arrangement was made when you were 12 by someone who wasn't you. That meant I didn't have the right to call it in. If you ever came to me, I wanted it to be because you chose to. Not because I'd made myself visible enough that you felt obligated." I thought about the entrance hall. The choice she had made not to cross the room. The calculation she had done, in real time, with me 15 feet away. "At the wedding," I said. 6 months ago. "Did you see me before I saw you?" A pause. The first pause in the conversation. She was very precise about the pauses. "Yes. And you didn't come over. I decided it was your choice to make." I looked at her. The afternoon light shifted in the courtyard outside. The grasses moved in a small wind that had found its way around the buildings. She held the looking without deflecting, without adding anything, which I recognized as its own discipline, the discipline of someone who has learned to let silences be what they are, rather than filling them with the noise of discomfort. "My mother thinks I'm going to fall in love with you," I said. "I know what your mother thinks. What do you think?" Her composure shifted slightly at the edges, not breaking, just becoming visible as effort for the first time in the conversation, the slight effort of someone choosing, deliberately, not to put a layer of management over their answer. I think the arrangement is not something I'm going to enforce, she said, and not something I'm going to pretend doesn't exist. Holding both of those at once requires more honesty than most first conversations ask for. I heard what she was not saying, that this was a first conversation, that the possibility of others was assumed in the grammar of the sentence, present in the word first. I left 20 minutes later and stood outside in the November cold for longer than I had intended to, not going toward the train in any purposeful way. The courtyard was visible through a gap in the building. The grasses were still moving. Someone had thought very carefully about those grasses. I told Belen that evening. Belen Ocampo had been my best friend since we were 19 and had stopped being diplomatic with me around the time we were 21 and had never gone back. She arrived at my apartment with wine, and the face she wore when she already had an opinion and was holding it in reserve. I told her everything. The toast, the arrangement, the word betrothed dropped into a Sunday kitchen, the office, the conference room. The woman who had taken my name like an expected weather event, not surprised, just arrived. The courtyard with the grasses. She said, "Is she attractive?" I said, "Belen." She said, "You've described her appearance 3 times in 10 minutes, twice without being asked. Once while you were ostensibly describing a glass wall." "She's composed," I said. I was aware I was continuing to answer as if the word attractive were not the word she had used. She's been carrying this for 13 years and has done nothing with it except be a person who doesn't enforce arrangements and knows when it's not her side of the room to cross. Belen looked at me with the expression that meant, "Do you hear yourself? You like her," she said. "I just met her." "You've technically known about her for 15 years, she said, "and you went to her office without calling, without an appointment, on a Tuesday in November. That is not what someone does when they want to say the arrangement is off and leave it at that." I went to tell her the arrangement was off. "Did you tell her that?" She meant the specific words. Whether I had actually produced the sentence I had written in my notes app, the sentence that had been ready and had not left the notes app. I had not said those words. Belen knew me well enough to know I hadn't. She was already not enforcing it, I said. Telling someone they can't have a thing they aren't trying to take seemed like the wrong conversation to arrive uninvited in order to have. Belen poured more wine. "I think you should have the dinner. Not your mother's dinner. Yours. On your terms. At a time you choose. In a shape you decide to give it." She would say yes, I said, "and I don't know what that means yet." "It means you'd find out," Belen said. "Which is what you've already started doing." On Wednesday I found a message in my work email, which felt significant, the work email, rather than any other address, which required looking something up, which meant she had thought about where to send it. The message said, "I heard you skipped the dinner. I'm not surprised and I'm not bothered by it. There's a coffee place on Marsh Street that's decent. If you're still interested in the conversation, I mention no pressure, no agenda from my end, just coffee and whatever we decide to make of it." Signed with her first name only. Brief and precise, like someone who has drafted a thing several times and arrived at the version that says exactly what it means without carrying anything extra. I read it twice, then I wrote back. "Thursday at noon," she said. "See you then." The coffee place on Marsh Street was warm, in the specific way of places that have been warm for a long time, the good kind of accumulated warmth, the kind that feels like it has reasons, mismatched chairs that had been acquired rather than curated, a window that looked out onto the street at an angle someone had thought about. The kind of place where the menu didn't need to be impressive because the coffee was good enough. I arrived 4 minutes early without meaning to. The 4 minutes were an accident that said something about where I was. Saren was already there, charcoal coat over a dark sweater. Her coffee already in front of her. She had arrived first and had not waited for me before ordering, which meant she had been here long enough to be settled, which meant she had been earlier than 4 minutes early. She put her phone face down on the table when I came in. Not into her pocket or her bag, face down on the table, which was the deliberate version of putting it away, a signal rather than an incidental action. She looked up with the same directness she had brought to everything, not performing attention, just giving it, fully and without apparent effort. I took off my coat, sat down, ordered. I said, "Tell me what 13 years looks like. From the inside." "Mostly normal," she said. I built a firm. I lived my life. I had friends and work I believed in, and the life that was mine to have. The information existed in the background, occasionally visible, not defining everything else. Not a weight, exactly. More like something in the peripheral vision that you know is there without needing to turn and look at it directly. But it was there. It was there, she agreed. As a thing I had decided not to use until it became a different kind of thing. If it became a different kind of thing, I didn't assume it would. Did it affect anything? One relationship, she said. About 4 years ago, I was with someone for 8 months, someone I respected, and who was honest with me and deserved the same in return. I told her the full version of my background, including the arrangement, including what it was and what it wasn't. She asked me whether I intended to honor it. I told her I didn't know, because that was the truth, and the truth was what she deserved. She didn't ask a second time. That was the end of it. She told this without bitterness and without the performed absence of feeling about it. She told it the way you tell the true version of something when you have had enough time with it to understand what it actually was. You could have found me at any point, I said. Yes. Why didn't you? Because I didn't want to be the person who showed up uninvited into your life, she said. You were living your life without the arrangement being any part of it. If I walked into it, I would have been bringing something you hadn't chosen to receive. And I have enough respect for the kind of person I thought you might be, that I didn't want the first thing you knew about me to be that I had decided I was entitled to enter your space. At the wedding, I said. How long had you been there before I arrived? She considered the question without appearing to need to. About 40 minutes. I saw you come in. I thought about finding you. And? I decided it was your choice. For the same reasons it had always been your choice. So you stood there for the rest of the evening. I had a long conversation with a man about urban drainage systems, she said. He was deeply invested in the future of permeable paving as an answer to runoff in high-density neighborhoods. It was more absorbing than it sounds. The laugh came out before I could stop it, short and genuine, not performed, surprised by its own arrival. The corner of her mouth moved in response 1 millimeter, barely, a movement contained almost to the point of invisible, as if she had decided to allow it rather than done it automatically. I catalogued it. The knowledge that she was someone who allowed a smile rather than simply having one was a specific piece of information. We stayed for an hour and a half, talked about her firm and what had drawn her to landscape architecture, specifically the way it sat at the intersection of the designed and the living, which meant it was never finished in the way a building was finished. We talked about what I did, the editing, and the occasional writing, the specific pleasure of sentences that work. We talked about our mothers in the careful way of people who love difficult things about their families and find it easier to approach obliquely. When we left, she held the door in the way of someone who does it automatically rather than as a gesture. On the pavement, she looked at me in the November cold. Your mother is going to ask, she said. Every day until she has an answer, I agreed. What will you tell her? That, I'm handling it. The corner of her mouth, again the same millimeter, the same contained allowance. I'll tell mine the same. Saren, I said. She stopped. The next conversation, I want to be the one who suggests it. She looked at me. She understood what I was asking, which was that the pacing of this, whatever this was becoming, should be mine to set. Not our mother's, not the arrangements, mine. Okay, she said. She said it simply, without adding anything to it. She walked away down the November street. I watched her go and stood on the pavement for longer than was necessary, thinking about the entrance hall and the choice she had made on her side and the choice I had made on mine. Two people in the same room making the same decision without knowing they were both making it. That Friday, she messaged. There's a landscape design opening tomorrow evening. The architect talks through what she built and why. Thought you might find it interesting. Thought you might want to come. I wrote, what time? She sent the address. The opening was in a gallery space near the river white walls, specific lighting, 60 people who were present because they actually cared. The architect talked through what she had built, a park in a neighborhood that had not had one for 40 years, with the specific clarity of someone who has thought about something for a long time and no longer needs to perform, the thinking. She talked about designing for people you hadn't met, which required imagining not the best version of the people, but the actual version, the people who would use it badly and come back anyway because it was theirs. The room felt genuinely smaller while she was talking. Saren met me at the door and handed me wine without ceremony, a glass extended as I walked in. No comment, no production of the gesture. As if she had simply noticed I was arriving and a glass was a thing I would want. We found a space near the back where we could hear clearly and had a wall behind us rather than other people. When the talk ended, we fell into conversation about the tension between designed beauty and actual human use. I had thoughts. She had different thoughts, and the difference was not the agreeable kind where someone softens their position to keep the peace of a conversation, but the actual kind, where two people are both interested enough in the thing to say what they actually think and wait to see what the other person does with it. I found this disproportionately good. We were the last to leave. On the street outside, she looked at me in the diffused November light that came from everywhere at once and cast no clean shadows. "Tell me something you haven't told anyone else this week," she said. The question surprised me. It was the kind of question someone asks when they are tired of the early acquaintance version of a person and want to try to get under it. I recognized it, because I did it too. "I've thought about something you said in the conference room more times than makes sense," I said, "about not wanting to show up uninvited. What it costs to know something for 13 years and choose not to use it. I keep trying to understand what kind of person makes that choice, and I keep arriving at the same answer, and it's not what I expected." "What's the answer?" "Someone who understands that claiming a person, even a person you might want, is not the same as being chosen by them. That the first thing only has value if the second thing is also true." She was quiet for a moment. She looked at the street, the empty November pavement. "It costs something," she said. "What?" "The version where you choose," she said. "Every time there was a reason to make myself visible to let you know I was there, to appear in a way that reminded you the possibility existed, I had to actively choose not to do that. The not taking has its own weight. It isn't absence, not really. It's a different form of presence. You become very aware of a door when you are deciding every day not to open it. You chose it anyway, every time. Why?" She looked at me. "Because the arrangement doesn't mean anything if you didn't choose it," she said. "And I have enough respect for the kind of person I could see you becoming from the coast trip, from the article, from the way you walked into my conference room without calling and asked me to explain myself, that I didn't want the first thing you knew about me to be, that I had claimed you before you'd had a chance to decide anything, for yourself." I said, "That is a significant thing to have said." "I know." She walked to her corner. When she reached it, she turned left rather than stopping to look back. She gave complete attention to what she was leaving and then directed all of it forward. I catalogued this alongside the millimeter smile. I stood on the pavement for a long time after she turned the corner, in the November cold, with the street entirely to myself. The morning arrived with the gray quality of a decision that has made itself while you were looking somewhere else, the specific gray of something that doesn't need announcement because it has already happened. I texted, "I've had my few days. When are you free?" 4 minutes later, "Tonight, if you want." "Tonight. Your neighborhood or mine?" "Yours. I'll bring food." She arrived at 7 with food from the place I had mentioned 2 weeks ago, in a conversation where I had said it as a passing observation, a thing I did not expect anyone to retain. The dish was the right one, not my second mention, the first, the one that had gone past faster and less emphatically. Still warm, which meant she had timed the drive precisely. Not because she was performing precision, but because she was the kind of person for whom the timing was part of the thinking, part of the same attention she applied to grasses and drainage systems and the angles at which light entered lobbies. She set everything on the counter with the same economy she brought to everything. I got plates. She found the cabinet with the glasses on her first try, which meant she had registered the layout of my kitchen in the first minutes inside it, a kind of spatial attention that was, I was learning, specifically and completely hers. We ate at the kitchen table. The room had the particular quality of small kitchens late at night with lamplight on, smaller, more complete, the space reduced to the things and people inside it. Outside the window, November rain had started at some point during the first course and was conducting itself against the glass. The room smelled of food and the faint ylang-ylang from the linen closet I had never done anything about because it had become the smell of home. I said, "Tell me the version you couldn't tell me in the conference room." She looked up from her plate. She held the question for a moment, not avoiding it, simply taking the measure of it before answering. She was not a person who answered before she was ready. "The arrangement," she said, "was the word my mother used. It's not the word I used." "What word did you use?" She looked at the table, then back at me. I didn't have one for a long time. Underneath the framework I had something that didn't fit at all, that felt nothing like an arrangement and everything like a direction I couldn't name, which I spent considerable time trying to make fit inside the word I'd been given because it was the only word available to me, she said. "The arrangement gave me language for something I would have felt anyway. That is the part I should have said in the conference room and didn't, because I wasn't sure I was ready to have said it to someone who had walked in off the street less than an hour before." "What do you mean?" "There was a coast trip," she said, "when you were 12 and I was 17. You asked me questions about high school, not the version adults give children, the softened one, the packaged one that protects everyone involved from the actual texture of the experience. You asked with the complete certainty that the honest version existed, and I should simply say it, not aggressively. Just as a baseline assumption. I am a person who wants the real answer. Please provide it." I thought about that for a long time after. I thought about what kind of person becomes that. The corner of her mouth moved the fond version, which I was learning to distinguish from the almost smile. What that 12-year-old who asked for the honest version might be doing in 10 years, in 15. What did it turn into? She looked at me across the kitchen table with the lamplight between us and the rain conducting itself against the window. "This," she said. "This is what it turned into." The kitchen was very quiet for a moment. The rain made a small adjustment in intensity, then settled. I said, "I saw you at the wedding before you saw me. I was near the entrance, near the bar, standing at the edge of the room where you could see the whole of it, without being in the middle of it. You were already there. I recognized you immediately from the article, from the photograph, from some older register I hadn't named. From the way you hold yourself in a room, which has apparently been consistent since you were 17, even though I didn't consciously realize I had a reference point for it. I recognized you. I felt something cross my collarbone that I translated as recognition, and nothing more. I stood where I was. She was very still. "I made the same choice you made," I said. "On my side of the hall, without knowing you were making it on yours. Two people in the same room deciding, separately and silently, that the crossing was not theirs to do," she said quietly. "I know." "You knew?" I suspected. "You were looking in my direction for about 4 seconds before you looked away, longer than a stranger would look, shorter than someone intending to approach. I noted it. I filed it with the other things I had filed and told myself it was probably coincidence." I stared at her. "I file most things," she said. "It's how I think. It helps me not mistake pattern for certainty, or wish for information. I file first and interpret later, when there is more data." I laughed, the real kind, all the way out, surprised by its own length. She watched me with that steady attentiveness, and when it settled she said nothing, which was also exactly right. She stayed until the rain stopped, and a little past that. When she finally stood to leave, we stood in the open doorway, the way people stand at the end of evenings when something real has happened and hasn't yet been decided, at the threshold of the conversation, rather than its conclusion, not wanting to name the ending because naming it would be an ending and neither of us was ready for that yet. She said, "Thursday?" "Thursday. Good night, Cleo." She said my name, the way you say the name of something you have known a long time and are finally allowed to say in the full voice rather than in passing, as a reference, as a word with someone else as the primary subject. My mother called Sunday morning. She and Rosario wanted a proper family dinner. I told her it would happen when Saren and I decided, and not before. She asked whether I had spoken to Saren. "We had coffee," I said. She made the sound she makes when she is trying very hard not to say the thing she wants to say. I said, "Don't." She didn't. Then, just before I could hang up, "She is a good person, Cleo." I need you to know that I know the difference between a good person and a convenient one. I know you do, I said. Wednesday evening, I met Saren at a restaurant near her firm. We ordered and talked in the way people talk when they have already said the significant things and are finding out what lives underneath them, what the texture of a person is, the shape of their ordinary days. She told me about her father, who had died when she was 26 suddenly, and then not suddenly, and then suddenly again, which is the way some deaths go, leaving no clean version of the event to hold on to afterward. She told me that his absence had made her work more personal than she usually explained in interviews. That the public spaces she designed were partly a form of grief management, an attempt to make things that lasted in the way that people couldn't, to put permanence into the ground because the people didn't stay permanent. She said this with the clarity of someone who has said a true thing enough times that it no longer arrives with difficulty attached. I told her about my grandmother, who had known exactly what I was at 14 in a way I hadn't quite known myself yet, and who had treated it as a fact about me rather than a complication to be managed. Who had never made it a subject of conversation, but had made it, quietly and completely, a thing that was simply part of who her granddaughter was, and therefore loved, without reservation. The specific shape of losing that? I told her. The way you lose not just the person, but the particular quality of being known that only that person gave you. She said she understood the specific shape of that kind of loss, not as a platitude, as a statement of recognition, from one person's particular experience of it to another's. We stayed until the restaurant started answering tables. Outside, she walked beside me to the corner and stopped. When the arrangement is gone, I said. Not managed. Not set aside, not living in a different room from us, while we pretend it isn't there, actually removed, actually treated as though it no longer exists as a frame for anything between us. What's left? She looked at me. I need to hear the version that exists independent of anything our families arranged, the version that stands on its own without that underneath it. She said, you. Just that. One word with nothing around it. Say it the full way, I said. She looked at me in the December cold. She took a breath. What's left is you, she said. Specifically, unmistakably, you, the person who showed up at my office without an appointment and asked me to explain myself with the same certainty that 12-year-old used to ask for the honest version of high school. The person who told me she had seen me in the entrance hall first and chose to stay where she was, which is the most honest thing anyone has said to me in recent memory, because most people would have crossed the room and told a different story about it afterward. What's left, if the arrangement disappears tonight, is the person standing at this corner asking me to say the full version, because she has always asked for the honest one, and I have never been able to refuse it. I looked at her for a long moment. I need you to do something, I said. Call your mother. Tonight. Right now. From this corner. Tell her the arrangement is over. Not deferred. Not paused. Not placed in a different category. Done. Finished. No longer a structure that exists between us. And I'll call mine. 2 weeks. 2 weeks, where nothing between us has that underneath it. She absorbed that. She looked at the street, the cold December pavement. And, after 2 weeks? I'll tell you what I know. Without the arrangement in the room. She took out her phone right there at the corner, in the December cold with her breath visible and the city moving quietly around us. She found Rosario's name and called. When her mother answered, she told her in her own language, quiet and without apology, with the directness of someone who had made the decision and was simply transmitting it that the arrangement was finished. That it needed to be over in order for anything real to exist in its place, that she needed to find out what was actually there. I listened to her say it, and felt something loosen in my chest that I had not known was held tight. I called my mother immediately after. My mother asked more questions than Rosario apparently had, as I could have predicted, and ultimately said yes, in the way she said yes to things she didn't entirely agree with, but understood were necessary. The form of agreement that is also a kind of trust. She had known me long enough, she said before we hung up, to know that I needed things to be mine before I could hold them. She was wise enough to know when stepping back was what was needed. We hung up. Saren put her phone in her pocket. It's done, she said. I know. She said goodnight and walked toward her building. I stood on the corner and watched her go and thought about the fact that she had done it immediately, without hesitation, without asking what she was getting in exchange for the thing she was giving up. She had heard what I was asking for and understood it, the proof that she could take the framework away and still choose to be here, and had provided the proof before I had finished asking for it. That was its own kind of answer. The 2 weeks were the strangest I had spent in years. Not because nothing happened, because everything was happening in the layer below the surface, where I couldn't manage it with conversation, or deflect it with logistics, or translate it into something more manageable by talking it through. I was living in the undertow, in the part of the current that doesn't announce itself. I would be working on something, editing a manuscript, making coffee, trying to sleep, and I would find myself thinking about the grasses in the courtyard that moved in wind, about the glass on the conference table that had been there before I arrived, about the 40 minutes she had stood on her side of the entrance hall because it was my choice to make, about the pencil behind her ear and the cabinet found on the first try and the dish that had still been warm because she had timed the drive, about the way she had said my name in the doorway, about the full version of what she had said in the kitchen, and what it had cost her, after 13 years of holding it, to say it out loud. I missed her. Specifically and without any arrangement underneath it, I missed the specific person, the specific quality of attention she brought to things, the way she looked at whatever she was looking at rather than the space near it, the way she allowed a smile, the way she said things plainly because she had thought about them enough that the plainness was available. The drainage systems conversation. The patience that was not patience but the specific shape of a respect she had decided to give me without my asking for it. Belen called at the end of the first week. "You know what you want," she said, without preamble. "You know what you want, and you're not genuinely suspended between two things about it. Stop acting like the 2 weeks are patience. They're not patience. They're a form of honoring her. You're doing exactly what she did for 13 years. Choosing deliberately to hold the choice rather than act on it before the conditions are right, making sure that when you say the thing you're going to say, you can say it cleanly and without anything else in the room with it." "I think I understand her better now," I said. "The 13 years, what it actually was." "That has been visible for about 10 days, Belen said. "Possibly longer. I think it was visible at the office, if you'd been willing to look at it then." I texted Saren at the end of the 2 weeks, Thursday morning. "Thursday?" The reply came within minutes. "Yes, Marsh Street? See you there. The coffee place at noon." I arrived exactly on time, a deliberate departure from the 4 minutes early of the first Thursday, which had been accidental. Arriving on time was its own kind of statement. I had considered it. Saren was already there, same chair near the window, no phone on the table, looking at the street with the full quality of attention she brought to everything. She looked at me when I came in. I sat down. "I want to tell you what I know," I said. "Yes," I said. "I know I spent 15 years not knowing about the arrangement, and it still found its way into the 3 things I remembered about you. I know I closed a tab at 23 and told myself it was curiosity, and that was not the honest version. I know that when my mother said your name, I sat back down at the table without deciding to, because your name is the kind of word that does that lands somewhere specific rather than somewhere general, that arrives with a weight that is not neutral. I know that I stood at the edge of a room for 2 hours rather than crossing 15 feet, because crossing 15 feet toward you felt like more than crossing a room, and I was not ready for what more was, and I am saying that because you deserve the honest version." She was very still. "I know you held something for 13 years and chose every time, deliberately and with full understanding of what you were choosing, not to use it," I said. "What I feel when I think about that is not pity, and not gratitude. It's the same word you used on the corner. You, the specific person who made that choice and that choice and that choice across 13 years for a reason that was about respect rather than strategy. The arrangement doesn't get credit for that. My mother doesn't get credit for it. It's yours, and it happened, and it matters." Saren said nothing for a moment. Then, quietly, "Cleo, say the full version," I said. She looked at me. She unfolded her hands on the table, a small deliberate movement, both hands open, and then turned one of them over, palm up. not reaching across to take mine. Not demanding anything, simply offering. The space between claiming and offering was specific, and she knew it, and I could see that she did. I have loved you badly, and at a distance for a long time, she said. Not the arrangement. You, the girl who asked for the honest version on a coast trip 15 years ago, and the woman who showed up at my office without calling and asked me to explain myself with the same certainty. The person who stood on a corner in December and asked me to take the framework apart right there on the pavement, and watched me do it, and still needed the 2 weeks. I have loved you across 13 years of choosing to stay where I was, and I am telling you now, not because the arrangement asks it of me, but because you asked me for the full version, and you have always asked for the honest one, and I have never been able to refuse it. I'm going to set terms, I said. Yes, we do this on our timeline, not our mother's, not the arrangements, ours. If this goes somewhere, it goes, because we take it there, together, with full knowledge of what we're doing. Yes, and you never use the arrangement as a reason. If you're here now, it's because you choose it, and that has to be something you can say as often as saying it requires. Every time, she said. Every single time it needs saying. She turned her hand over on the table. Palm still up, not reaching, waiting. I put my hand in hers. The contact was quiet. The specific warmth of a hand, extended with full knowledge of what it was extending, and mine meeting it with the same understanding. Patient. Neither of us made it more than the moment required. Neither of us needed to make it anything other than what it was. We stayed for another hour. Talked about what we wanted, and what we were afraid of, and the specific difficulty of beginning something when the beginning has been made strange by a long history. When we finally left, we walked out together. She fell into step beside me, and we walked in the direction of neither of our offices, just the city in December, and the simple adjacency of two people who had decided, without any arrangement underneath it, to be adjacent. 3 weeks later, we went to the family dinner. On our own terms, a Sunday afternoon at my mother's house, a time and date we had chosen between us. Both families at the same table, the way our mothers had wanted but in the form we had decided to give it. The table was loud with the noise of people who have known each other long enough to talk over each other without giving offense, to reference things from 20 years ago in shorthand that requires no explanation, to laugh at observations before they are finished. My mother had made too much food, which was how she expressed that something mattered. Rosario had brought things she had made herself, which was her version of the same language. They sat on the same side of the table and talked over each other exactly the way they had been doing for 25 years. Saren sat beside me, close enough that I was aware of her shoulder at the same altitude as mine, the warmth of proximity across the length of a meal. She was more relaxed than I had seen her outside of the kitchen with Rosario. She had a slight loosening of the precision, some quality that had been learned from her mother, and then managed into something quieter in the world outside this table. I watched her argue amiably with Rosario about something, and thought about what it cost to carry an arrangement for 13 years and arrive here anyway, at this table, with nothing but the choice itself as the reason. At the second course, Seren's hand found mine under the table. Not dramatically, not as a statement to be made to the room. Her hand, warm and deliberate, settling onto mine with the calm of something arriving where it was going, where it had always been going. I turned my hand over, palm up, the way I had learned to in the coffee place 3 weeks before. She took it. Above the table, nothing changed. The conversation about a cousin's renovation continued, with everyone having opinions about load-bearing walls. My mother was telling Rosario something from 20 years ago that they both found unreasonably funny. The food was good. The room was warm. The wine was 3/4 gone. Below the table, her thumb moved once across my knuckles. Patient, specific. The smallest possible gesture, exactly sufficient, nothing extra. I looked at the side of her face, the line of her jaw, the short, dark hair, the posture that was always the same, composed and present, but here, at the edge of something softer that only appeared at this table with these people. She turned and looked at me. Not for long. Just long enough to be what it was, a moment of acknowledgement between two people keeping something theirs inside a room full of other people who are very invested in it. Then she looked back at the table and said something to Rosario about load-bearing walls that made Rosario throw her head back and laugh, and the dinner continued in all its warm and ordinary noise. We left together. Outside my building in the December cold, the night quiet around us, she stood with her hands in her pockets and looked at me. "Saren," I said. She waited. "I chose this," I said. "Not the arrangement. Not because my mother said your name in a kitchen in November, and something in me that I hadn't been watching sat back down. You, specifically, for the specific reasons that are yours and not anyone else's, on a Thursday in December, because I wanted to, and I was ready to say so, in the full voice." She looked at me in the December dark, the lights of the building behind me, her breath visible in the cold. "I know," she said. "Say it back," I said. "I chose you," she said. "Not the arrangement. The arrangement was a word someone else put on something that existed before it and after it and right now without any framework underneath it. I chose you before the arrangement had a word for it, at a coast trip when I was 17, and you were 12, and you asked me for the honest version. I chose you at 25, not crossing a room when I wanted to, at a wedding, not crossing a hall. I chose you on a corner in December when you asked me to take the framework apart, and I did it immediately because that was the only correct answer to what you were asking. I choose you now. I intend to say so again, regularly, in whatever form the saying needs to take." I kissed her. It was quiet, the patient kind, not urgent, and not restrained. Two people who have been very careful for a long time, finally not being careful. Her hand came to my jaw, first warm against the December cold. The specific warmth of someone who has decided to close the distance and has done it with full knowledge of what they are doing and stayed there the way things stay when they have arrived where they were going. My hand found her coat sleeve. I held on. The December air held us in it. When we stopped, it was still cold and very clear, the city faint around us, the house lights still on in the window above. She said, against the cold air between us, "I've been thinking about that since October." I said, "The entrance hall or earlier?" She said, "The coast trip." I laughed. The real version, all the way out, surprised by its own length, surprised by what she had said and by the specific quality of standing here in December and saying it. She listened to it with full attention, no looking away, no pretending not to watch, and when it settled she was almost smiling. The full version, the catalogued version, the one that was specifically mine to cause, that I had been learning the conditions for. I said, "That is not fair." She said, "I know. I told you I was saving things. I save a great many things and I do not apologize for it." She drove away into the December night. I stood outside my building in the cold and didn't go inside immediately. I stood there and thought about the arrangement and what it had done and what it had not done and what existed completely outside of either what had been there before, any word for it, and was still there now, on the other side of November and December, and 2 weeks of choosing to wait and a corner at 10:15 and a palm turned upward on a coffee table. My mother had made a promise to a friend. The promise had carried, for 15 years, the shape of something she couldn't name precisely, and so had named the only way she knew, with the word that belonged to another century, placed into a Sunday kitchen with the coffee still warm, and left there to be received. She had been wrong to make it without my knowledge, without my consent, without understanding that the thing she was trying to do for me was also something being done to me. She had also been, in the way of people who have known you long enough to see the things you can't yet see about yourself, exactly right about the thing she was pointing at. Which is the specific and maddening and ultimately forgivable quality of mothers who have had you for 27 years and have watched you become a person and have occasionally understood what you were becoming before you did. The arrangement was the beginning of a sentence that belonged to someone else. What I was standing inside in the December cold with the warmth of her still on my mouth and a Thursday already agreed to and her thumb's path across my knuckles, sitting in me like something that had found its place was the sentence I had written myself, not arranged, not promised into existence by two people over coffee 2 decades ago, not named before I had language for it or claimed before I had had the chance to do my own claiming, chosen, on my own. With full knowledge of what I was choosing and full willingness to keep choosing it, every time it required choosing, in whatever form the choosing needed to take. That was the only version of the thing that had ever been real. Everything else was just the arrangement that led me to the door. What was on the other side of the door was mine.